I'm home. All the time it was... We finally really did it. You maniacs! You blew it up! Oh, damn you! God damn you all to hell!
One morning when I was 3 or 4, I was laying in bed and I noticed a spot on the wall above me. It looked like it was moving, just pivoting a little bit in place, and I thought it was a bug. I called for my parents, they came in the room, they looked at it and they told me it was just a hole in the wall where a picture used to hang, that the hole was from a nail. I didn't believe them, but they left the room and they went back to bed. When they left, this spot started moving again. It looked a little oblong and it wasn't really round, so I didn't really think it looked like a hole. So I called my parents again, they came back in and repeated the same charade. My dad touched the hole. They tried to prove to me that it wasn't a bug. I didn't believe them again, but they left and it started to move again. I think the question became, how do you capture that sort of phenomenon in architecture? How do you manifest something like that intentionally? Or how could a building appear to be animate without actually being animated? It's a sort of personification. The hole in the wall had a character. It was sort of mocking. What sort of things allow you to personify a building? There's some really great faces in the floor of Michelangelo's Laurentian Library. All along the floor, there are all these different faces making funny expressions in the floor pattern. They play that sort of role. They give the reading room a personality. They're there only if your eye catches them, but otherwise they're just an ornamental pattern. There's a window on the facade of Brunelleschi's Florence Hospital. It's like that too. It's a circle and you look at it obliquely, then when you move towards it and stand in front of it, you realize it's an oval. It's a really basic optical illusion, but it's a quirky feature on the building. It's pretty confusing to see at first. You know, obviously there are a lot of things that do this, like Richardson's Seaver Hall and Harvard Yard. It looks like it's chubby and tired. It has a pretty obvious character. In the weeks leading up to this semester, I've been playing with these semi-figurative oil sketches. I think the project initially built off what I was trying to do with those. It's probably why Mac decided to give me a puppet theater program in the first place. They're pretty puppet-like. They're loosely based on the shapes from an 11th century stained glass window I saw over at the art museum. There's a man, I'm assuming he's a saint, and he's kneeling facing another, and there are some other people around them, behind them. The kneeling or the sitting man is handing something to the other, so his arm reaches across like this, in front of some of the people behind him. Some of the mullions make the contours of the bodies in the image, so they shape the figures, and then some don't. And reducing them to black and white shapes, just simple figure ground compositions, you still get a semblance of bodies, glimpses of pieces of bodies. The only thing you really need to know about puppets is that they've been around for thousands of years and they've basically remained the same. There are obviously different styles, but all across the world, across cultures, across history, there are maybe 5 types of puppets. Generally, they fall into 2 broader categories. There are puppets that are worn on the body, and then there are puppets that are operated from without. Body puppets include puppets that fully envelop the body, and then things like hand puppets, which are just worn on an appendage. And these could have a moving mouth like a Muppet, or not, and their faces are just inanimate. The other types include marionettes. Those are operated from above with strings, and there are stick puppets, which are operated from below. A variation of the stick puppet is the shadow puppet. Historically, those were more prominent in the East, mostly in India, China, and Indonesia, but they're still present in the Middle East and the West. They'd often be very intricately made, usually of papers or skins and dyes, and have their shadows cast onto a screen, so they'd be translucent and opaque. Balinese shadow puppet theater had a pretty remarkable amount of depth. They'd place the puppets at different distances between the screen and the light source, so they weren't just one-dimensional silhouettes. You'd get a sense of things being in and out of focus. The spaces of performance range from proper theaters to stands in parks or piazzas to just streets in a festival. They could be mobile, temporary, permanent. They're really anything. even just a door for the puppeteer to hide behind. They're often depicted as a sort of chaotic environment where the audience is all rowdy and riled up. It was typically cast as a sort of poor man's theater, entertainment for the lower classes. This wasn't always the case, of course, but in the West it was pretty typical. As cinema developed, puppets became more of a niche entertainment for children. They couldn't really match people's newfound appetite for the naturalism of the movies. It's been pretty common for puppets to be depicted as crude and mischievous in some way or another. There's a pretty widespread presence of violence, sex, and satire across puppet theater. Puppets were also used for religious enactments and things like that, tellings of the biblical stories during periods when puppets weren't condemned as devilry by the church. Their scale is very diverse. Again, it could be anything. You have multi-story Thanksgiving parade floats as a sort of upside-down marionette. You have political or religious effigies like the work of the Bread and Puppet Theater from the 60s. You have 50-pound Italian marionettes, down to small toys like the ones Paul Klee made for his son. Just some cloth scraps and crudely made clay heads. So you get dramatically different ways that the humor relates to their scale. Some take on the movement of your hand, which lends them the kind of jerky movement you typically expect of puppets. Others, like huge parade floats, are naturally slower and they take on a more billowing kind of movement. Theaters, of course, are scaled appropriately. Stands in Italy, also in China, were often small towers, so they were tall enough for the puppeteer to stand inside and then operate a stick or a hand puppet in the proscenium on top. There's something that's distinctly captivating in puppet performance compared to human theater. The actor is still there, but a step removed. Traditional Japanese bunraku theater is probably one of the more interesting genres, where one puppet would be controlled by 3 visible puppeteers. They were on stage a little lower down behind a ground prop to waist level. This sort of choreography where you see both the human and the puppet at once is pretty telling about puppetry in general. You know it's fake, but there's something uncanny and completely enthralling about the movements of a puppet, even when you could see the human actor. I had chosen the site before I knew what the program was. It's on a beach in St. Augustine, a town in Florida where I'd spent part of my teen years. I think the beach ended up giving a lot to the program. The flatness and expansiveness of the beach, I think it naturally creates an ambiguity of scale. You could see something from really far away and think it's still close. I mean, I could be 5 miles from the pier and think I was almost there. Everything at the beach is moving. They're all the animals, schools of fish, birds, crabs, bugs. But the non-living things are the most animate. The water moves, the sand moves, the air, they're all rhythmically moving. The site naturally has the sort of qualities that can make a building animate. Mac would keep telling me that the building is the puppet.
You know what, John? I think the building... Yes, the building is the puppet.
It's a veiled wooden scaffold sitting on a rock in the water. It's sitting on a bed of coquina. Coquina is a sedimentary rock made of shells. It's found in the area. The Spanish used to build their forts out of it because it was soft enough to take cannonball impacts without cracking. So the tower sits on this rock out in the water. It's accessible depending on the tide. You could always swim out to it or walk if the tide is out. It's around 160 feet tall, about the size of a lighthouse. It's really meant to be an object to be seen against the flatness of the beach, against the horizon. Every full level has a mezzanine above and below it. In most types of puppet performance, the actors are always at a different level than the stage to hide themselves. Even when it's not being occupied, the building is still giving its own sort of performance on the beach, for people to see from near, from down the beach, from the water, whatever. The structural members extend past their joints so that when you look up, there's more overlaps of the parts depending on how oblique your view is. They become more or less dense depending on where you see it from. And then imagine its fabric changes color with the sky. When the sun sets at night, it's only a silhouette or a big lamp. During a hurricane, maybe it falls. there's very little to this building. It's a folly. It's only imitating a building. It's still a box with a structural grid, some stairs, floors, a foundation, but not quite. Like the puppet's not quite human. It's not even almost human, really. It's pretty far off.